Malaria by Katie and Alex.
The causative agent of this disease is a eukaryote. It's caused by a single-celled parasitic protozoan called Plasmodium. There are over 100 species of this parasite. The 4 variations most commonly infect humans are the Plasmodium falciparum, Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium ovale, and Plasmodium malariae. Plasmodium falciparum is the most dangerous and the most frequent cause of malaria. The life cycle of a malaria parasite starts when sporozoites enter the human liver cell. They grow in the liver cell and then release merozoites into red blood cells. The red blood cells either produce more merozoites or move on to the sexual stage where the gametophytes form. Mosquitoes ingest the parasite after taking blood from a human, and the gametes combine, forming a zygote. The zygote develops into an ookinete, and then an oocyst containing more sporozoites. The cycle starts over again when mosquitoes bite a human and inject the parasites.
This disease is extremely prevalent in Africa. The Plasmodium falciparum is the cause of most malaria deaths, especially in Africa. The rare Plasmodium ovale occurs mostly in West Africa, and the Plasmodium malariae still exists in Africa, even though it has been mostly eradicated from more temperate climates. Plasmodium vivax is found mostly in the tropics in Asia and is less severe than other species found that affect humans. Currently, there are about 300 to 500 million cases a year, with 1 million deaths because of malaria.
The rate of new infections depends where in the world you're looking at. In the United States, where malaria has been almost completely wiped out, the rate is extremely low with about 1,200 cases a year. People in endemic areas, such as sub-Saharan Africa, are repeatedly exposed to infection, and research found that the infection rate went up 40% between 1970 and 1997. The morbidity and mortality rate from 1992 to 2004 showed that clinical malaria morbidity represented 39% of total morbidity in healthcare centers. Average malaria mortality was 2.4% among the total population, and 10.4% in children younger than 5 years of age, was the highest in the 1992 to 1995 period. This parasitic pathogen resides in mosquitoes until injected into humans, where it resides into red blood cells. Malaria is usually transmitted through infected mosquitoes, but also can be transmitted through contaminated blood from mother to fetus during pregnancy or birth, by blood transfusions, organ transplants, or infected needles. Malaria parasites invade the skin, blood, liver, gut, and salivary glands. During the malaria cycle, products of the Plasmodium, called malaria toxins, direct the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines, which act on many cellular systems. The parasitic antigens also stimulate T cells that produce or signal the production of cytokines from other cells.
Malaria produces a string of recurrent attacks, each of which have 3 stages. The infected person will first experience chills, followed by a fever, then sweating. Other symptoms include headaches, malaise, fatigue, muscular pains, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. After these symptoms, the body temperature will rise, and then the body will begin to sweat to cool the body down. The symptoms occur 10 to 16 days after the infectious mosquito bite because of the bursting red blood cells. If a large number of red blood cells are infected, the malaria attacks will occur at regular intervals. The final cause of death is liver failure, unless you receive treatment. Malaria should be suspected if a person has recently been to the tropics or received a blood transfusion. A thick blood smear from a pricked finger examined under a microscope will usually confirm the diagnosis because it is possible to spot the parasites. Malaria is most effectively treated if the area and the season the person is bitten in are taken into account. Quinine was what used to be the drug that was most frequently used to treat malaria until research on malaria increased and the drug chloroquine was developed. Eventually, chloroquine-resistant strains of malaria developed and spread to most of the world. New forms of medicine to treat malaria have had to be developed every time a strain of malaria becomes resistant to that drug. Vaccines are now being used to immunize people against malaria infections. To prevent malaria, mosquito nets and insecticide are now being used to control mosquito populations in areas where malaria is common.
Malaria has been around since ancient times. It was previously found in more temperate areas, such as marshes and swamps. People thought the disease was caused by bad air, hence the name malaria. In 1880, a single-cell parasite Plasmodium was discovered by the French scientist Alphonse Leverin. In about 1900, scientists in Italy and India found that Anopheles mosquitoes were the transmitters of the disease. Malaria was very prevalent in the United States, especially on early settlers. Malaria was also a big factor in a lot of wars, wiping out Roman soldiers in World War II, and the Vietnam War. During World War II, DDT, an insecticide, and chloroquine were introduced, both very effective at the time for fighting malaria mosquitoes. The World Health Organization launched a movement in the mid-1950s to wipe out malaria, and it was pretty effective until DDT proved to be harmful to the environment and mosquitoes developed resistance to DDT and chloroquine. This means that DDT and chloroquine were no longer viable options for fighting malaria and hindering our ability to limit the spread of disease. In order to prevent the spread of disease, vaccines and bed nets were developed and are effective ways of preventing malaria. In poor areas of Africa, it's much more difficult to prevent the spread of malaria because there just isn't the money or resources.
Mosquito bites, more than just an itch.